My intention was, and still is, that we present in a somewhat concentrated form some important view of the Gnostic tradition and thereby not have to go into perhaps some of the elaborate mythological details that we have at other times. And so when I thought of this idea of who are the Gnostics, and particularly of this evening's subject of where do we come from, what my intention was to indicate to us within our circumstances, within our own vision, as to how we may approach these subjects. I will also preface my remarks by saying that when I put the question, where do we come from, I decided to approach the subject in a sort of reverse order by starting of where we are. I won't say where we are at, because it's bad grammar, so as to where we are, and then trace to as much as possible, trace our way back from the present to the past as to where we may have originated in order to arrive in this condition. Now, this being the case, what we shall engage in then is a partial view of the Gnostic tradition, about the partial world view, as we call it in German, Weltanschauung. Now, in order to do that, we need to get a little bit of an insight into an explanation of the general character of the esoteric tradition. By this is meant that pretty much wherever we go, we will find spiritual traditions. And that is also true historically. I well remember Alan Watts, whom I had a great deal of regard for, saying once that every culture, I think he used the term culture, that was worth anything in the history of the world was totally infused with and dominated by religion. And that means then that the spiritual view of life, the spiritual world view of existence appears to be a natural human desire, which one finds appearing all the time. Now then, we might ask ourselves, if that is indeed the case, then why do we see so little of it at the present time in a so-called secular age, which might as well call itself an atheistic age? And the answer to it is that we don't have an answer, except that there are periods of human history when the previously prevailing patterns undergo changes, and that it may very well be the case in this instance. those who are aware of C.G. Jung and his Red Book will see that it, especially the Red Book, contains a very portentous prophecy to the effect that the spiritual conditions, primarily what Jung refers to as the God image, the way of envisioning the divine, are in the process of undergoing big changes, and that in fact he predicted, and I have spoken about that here before, the appearance of a new God image, which would mean that the manner in which our culture has envisioned the superior power, as it is often called, may be undergoing some significant changes. And of course the results of these we would only find out about when the changes occurred. So these are all possibilities. But whatever being the case, we are here, and I will begin with an item of childish reminiscence, wherein I will convey to you in English translation just the opening sentence of the Hungarian language version of the Roman Catechism, which I learned when I was a child. And I have always felt that, brief as it is, and no doubt geared to a monotheistic God image, it is a very good, concise definition. And it the catechism simply means a book of instruction. That's an old Greek term. And so what the instruction is concerning here, that there are questions and then there are concise answers. So the very first question in the catechism that I learned as a child is, if I can translate it properly, why are we here on earth? So this is different from where do we come from. I hope to go into some of that as we move along. So why are we here on earth? And the answer to it was to the effect, we are on earth in order, that's the very first two words, we are on earth in order to know God. Now a more Gnostic answer I couldn't have devised myself, and this formulation goes back, I would say, probably to the at least to the 18th century. Now, that being the case, we need to consider that, and I think that's a very significant statement, and that it is put on the beginning of an explanatory sentence is also quite important. Because I well remember a good many years later when I was already here in Hollywood, and so when someone who was actually became quite an important person in my life asked me, what is it that you really want? And I said, I want to know God. And you should have seen the eyes. And I thought to myself, well, whether somebody likes it or not, that is the truth. So I adhere to that, and I do think that it is really a very abbreviated statement of the Gnostic intention, because as I hope to indicate at least tonight, the nature of the ultimate reality, of the deity, whatever we wish to call it, is subject, under the right circumstances, to deeper cognition of our own part. In other words, the ultimate reality can be known if we go about it the right way and if we persist in the proper fashion. Now, we need to keep in mind, of course, that contention does not indicate that the innumerable approaches and definitions and sectarian divergences that exist throughout the world are all great and marvelous and wonderful and truthful, because if such were the case, then we would have thousands of simultaneously present truths, which is, at least in our thinking, pretty much of an impossibility, because we have a particular question, we have a particular issue that we address, then we sort of expect one truth or one answer that we believe to be the truth, instead of a whole bunch of them. But this being the case, I think we can approach the subject in the manner that I originally intended. Also, by way of yet an additional introductory idea, I may wish to say something about the term worldview, which I translate from the German Weltanschauung, and which I often say that another German-speaking esotericist of some great stature, namely the late Max Heindel, had used the English word cosmoconception, which is very precise and very Germanic, and perhaps not all that terribly informative. In any event, so this is the kind of intention behind my attempts, that it is very important to have an overall view of life and life and death and all that goes in between at the human level, of the coming into existence of reality and life. And if we have such a conception, then various issues of our lives may fall into their meaningful places as the reason of that basic recognition. So sometimes, in order to have an understanding, a satisfactory understanding, a useful understanding of life, we may need something of that sort. Now, with all of those preconditions and ideas, we may also insert right at the beginning, and the substance of that hopefully to emerge later, we might mention at the very beginning that it would seem that in all the great spiritual traditions of the world, maybe not even great ones numerically speaking, but still influential, we always find at least two modalities of approach. One of them is maybe defined as external, the other one might be defined as internal. And by this we mean not that the entire process is characterized by that, but that certain kinds of recognitions come to us because of interior insight, and others come to us because of external seeming evidence. And they both are present, and they may even supplement and complement each other, and psychologically they may be approached to some extent by one of the initial recognitions of C.G. Jung, who said that there are two views of anything: extroverted and introverted, and that this needs to be understood, and that the tendency of our civilization, and now we are going back to a judgment of the early part of the 20th century, that the tendency of our civilization, for a variety of historical reasons, has been primarily extroverted, and that this of necessity creates a one-sidedness in consciousness, whether of the individual or of the culture. And I don't think he was terribly in favor of it. And neither are many of us, because even if you haven't lived to the mature old age that with God's help I have up to this time, it has probably occurred to you that one misses some very important realities, some very important truths, when one approaches them in a one-sided manner. And the primarily extroverted view of life and its circumstances is definitely of that order. Now, I would say that if you encounter some hermits, yogis in the Himalayas, and heaven knows other people following very inward-turned spiritual and related disciplines, then you might find a one-sidedness in the spiritual direction. Although, I have not maybe associated with enough people of that kind, I haven't really hardly ever encountered anybody who was, a spiritual orientation, but excessively introverted. In fact, I found more balance between extroverted and introverted orientations and views among such people than almost anywhere else. So the reasons for that are a subject of speculation, but they are definitely present. Now, let's say then what we may consider is the fact that there is such an external and an internal possibility of viewing reality, and that they need to be considered. So it would also seem that in the long, almost endless stream of human history, it became an intellectual and spiritual fact that there were simultaneously and in the same localities two different traditions. Those that approached life externally primarily, and those that approached it internally primarily. And that these were not necessarily opposed to each other or contradictory to each other, but they were simply two approaches, two different points of view. And so what we represent here in our Gnostic and theosophical work is based primarily on the internal tradition, because the tradition itself, we don't know when that may have happened, originated and was then perpetuated by way of people's endeavor to look within themselves. And when we look at the very different manifestations of this internal, or one 19th century word for it is esoteric tradition, then we can find that there is usually one tradition that derives its origin, its very nature from internal knowledge, from internal insight. Which C.G. Jung, whom I am a little bit obsessed with this evening, in addition to being obsessed with him anyhow, C.G. Jung said that the only tradition that he was really familiar with, which originated in the psyche, namely the soul, was a Gnostic tradition. That all the rest of them that were around were more mixed with other points of view and were not as purely internal in nature and in effect. Well, Jung generally knew things of this nature, especially anything that relates to the psyche, so I think we can believe him. Now, let's see now, after we have a little notion of the general character of the exoteric and the esoteric traditions. I didn't say too much about the exoteric because we live in the middle of one. I must say, speaking for myself, I live within it rather reluctantly. But then reluctant living has been a long habit with me. I don't know whether that tells you anything good about me, probably not, but I'll tell it to you anyway. So let us say that being the case, we then need to consider that even though their seeming direction, their seeming thrust, these two traditions nevertheless were always there, and they supplemented and complemented each other in various ways. Even in a place like India, let's say, which certainly has been practicing, let's say, religion and spirituality for countless generations and so forth, you will find some schools that are of a more extroverted nature and that concentrate more on practice of various kinds, which is at least in part external in nature. There's a lot of magic. I have never been to India, although it was invited many times. So here I'm not really speaking out of experience, but let us say that there have always been schools of thought and activity there, let us say, which were to a major extent concentrating on results. There is a tremendous amount of practical magic, for instance, in India. I remember from one of my late teachers, Professor Ernest Wood, who spoke here many times, an early theosophical luminary, who said, the only place that I know where people have been killed, to my knowledge, by malign magic is in India. So that maybe will modify a little bit your impression that you are dealing with goody, only very good people there. Which is definitely then a result that would go to external results, a result that would go to an external direction. Now, so let us then try to contemplate within our own circumstances as much of this as we can, and let us see how these approaches are present within our thinking and how we may properly, for the proper purposes, take advantage of them. Let us say there is in both of these traditions there are certain foundational recognitions, and one of these is the awareness of a higher power, as it also has been called, and as depending on the particular religious milieu, it has been maybe called God, has been called by various divine names, and so forth, various specific names, but was always there. In other words, the recognition that there is a reality superior to the one that we are living in. The reality of, and that to relate to that reality and possibly to derive benefits from our acquaintance with it is a very important and a very helpful thing, because without it we are really guilty of a great cultural one-sidedness. So when one little example which I have quoted here, and some of you have probably heard me voice this before, which I always considered to be a good little example, is that there was a correspondence, and I don't want to strain my geriatric memory at this point for the names, but when the people who founded the really rather significant cultural movement that goes under the name of Alcoholics Anonymous, when they addressed C.G. Jung and submitted their, I don't know how many points they have, everybody has points, and he sent it, the one gentleman sent it to him, and Jung wrote back and he said, those are very fine points, but there is something missing. He said, if you are not going to include in a prominent fashion the reference to the higher power, your system is not going to work. In other words, it is a psychological as well as other necessity to make meaningful reference to the, let's say, the higher power. If you can do that, the chances of your project succeeding will be considerably enhanced. Now, why, let's say now in terms of effect, in terms of how a view, I'm not going to say belief because Gnostics are not very big on belief, but let's say a view of the presence and the importance of a higher power, how this affects life in general. Let me just mention a few things. Number one, derived from the contact with, let me just put it that way, of the higher power, their arise two qualities that are extremely important in individual and in collective life, both. You seldom find qualities that meet those two requirements. The first one is a sense of order, namely, where there is a relationship with a higher power, it is quite obvious that the higher power influences, maybe even imposes, brings about a sense of order in life. And I think that probably most of us are sufficiently oriented in that fashion, that when there is no order in life, private or public, it's a pretty doggone poor life. So that why? Because somehow a sense of order is one of these qualities which can act as the foundation of all kinds of other important issues and qualities. As long as there is an order, an orderly, more or less orderly life, then all kinds of helpful developments are possible. Without such order, they are pretty much peripheral at best. And the second, which is somewhat related to that, although not identical with it, is a sense of justice. Justice. Now, it has been said, for instance, that in fact, I think there has just been some recent publications based on some apparently more recent discoveries that one of the great Gnostic scriptures that has been discovered more recently had indicated that speaking of the Old Testament God, about old Jehovah, about all you can say about him is that most of the time he's a God of justice. He's concerned with justice, but not anything else. This teaching that I am now voicing is attributed to one of the great ancient Gnostic teachers called Marcion. That there is a book that came out not very long ago called The Gospel of Marcion. It's not really a new gospel that was discovered, but rather it is a compilation of the teachings of Marcion, and that's what he said. If you want to go with that God, the most you are going to get out of that old boy is some justice, but not much of anything else. That's what Marcion said, and I would agree with him. So now what you need here is therefore, to try to concentrate these statements, what we need then generally in humanity, and is actually present generally in humanity, is the cultivation of on the part of a society, maybe not so much a society, but of a populace that acknowledge the existence of a superior power and that observes standards of behavior that are based on on certain deeper recognitions of reality. For one thing, I think what might be called the cosmology of the system, meaning that this kind of behavior, this kind of life would be consistent with the nature of the cosmos within which you live, in the nature of the totality within which you function, and of which, at least to a certain extent, you are a part. If you would observe these particular maxims, then you would fit into a greater and ultimately spiritual reality. Not the reality of any particular province, not the reality of any particular country, maybe not even of any particular culture as much as of a reality that has its root in something deeper, something that has rightly been called transcendental. Because what does that mean? To transcend means to go beyond, Latin. So let's say beyond what? Well, beyond this goofy reality within which we live. And I would say if we wouldn't have the capacity to somehow break through the goofiness within which we exist and so forth, then life would be even more miserable than it so often appears to us. So it's a very important thing to be able to do that. The way I like to express that with one of the old English words is that it's cutting through the balderdash. And I have used it a lot with great success, that expression. And then it came to me, I don't really know what a balderdash is. So I had to do all kinds of research, and an old lawyer friend of mine was a great researcher who gave me this chair on which I sit, the late Dr. James Ingebretsen. He is the one who came up with the only kind of prosaic explanation that the balderdash is an expression or a concept that originates in the noble art of the making of beer. And the reason being that what is left over with the various fermenting substances and then possibly thrown away is a balderdash. And that the reason for it in turn being that the sacred drink in good old days in the British Isles and thereabouts was beer. And it was devoted to the Germanic god Baldur. So Baldur's dash, Baldur's stuff. So now you have received this momentous revelation of the evening of what balderdash, or at least how the term balderdash originates. Now, aside from that, what needs to be kept in mind, therefore, that when the existence and the practical importance of a superior power, which means superior to the powers that we generally encounter, is present, is acknowledged, and when people observe standards of behavior that are based on at least some of the intentionality of that superior power, then you've got something going. And we might also indicate that these recognitions have been with us and have proven to be efficacious in a deeper psycho-spiritual sense under all kinds of circumstances, in all kinds of historical periods, and in all sorts of cultures and geographical areas. And that in itself is probably a fairly good recommendation. So I will conclude this particular section by saying that when there is a conviction present in a large enough number of people concerning the existence and the power of a superior power, of a place wherein one resides, one's homeland, let us say, and of justice, then one has a truly viable, though small, skeletal framework of intellectual and spiritual ideas to carry one forward. As some of you know, I have developed, especially in more recent years, the tendency to refer back to personal experiences, and I will do that increasingly this evening. And one of them that comes to my mind is that when I was a small child already, I noticed that there was a sort of a little verse. It has some rhyme in Hungarian. The Hungarian language is not in others, which was everywhere. And in the schools, I did not attend any public school until I was 10 years old. No elementary school for me. Nothing elementary, my dear Watson. But let us say in every elementary school and many public buildings, there would always be a big, either a poster or maybe an embroidered piece of cloth or something like that with a little verse in it. And I don't think it would do you would be conducive to your information if I recited it in Hungarian, although it's not very long. The Hungarian language is a very difficult language. I knew only one non-Hungarian born and raised person in the whole universe, and of course my knowledge extends over all the universe, who spoke really good Hungarian. And that was my aunt by marriage, Aunt Gladys from Washington, D.C., who was for many years the wife of the Hungarian ambassador in Washington, D.C. And she was American, but she made it her business to learn perfect Hungarian, being the ambassador's wife, and apparently she did. Why I brought that up right now, I'm not so sure, but it seemed to be useful at the time. In any event, the verse that I'm referring to was penned, and I'll tell you the surprise that I received many years later when I found out who wrote it, that it was written at a time when the real difficulties of Hungary were beginning. The Russians weren't there yet, but the victorious powers of World War I had already taken away more than half of the territory of Hungary and ceded it to other countries. It would be sort of as if the United States were reduced to the New England states and nothing else. So let us say that was not a very smart move, and it was caused a great deal of unhappiness in the populace. So the verse started in that particular misfortune, but we had enough misfortunes descending upon us subsequently, so it came to be applicable to many things. And this is a reader English that says, I believe in one God, I believe in one fatherland, I believe in one divine eternal justice, I believe in the resurrection of Hungary. And it took probably over 70 years before that resurrection occurred. And I feel blessed and inspired that I was able to see some of it some years ago when we went back to Budapest. So what we have here is not the cultivation of a fanatical group of people, whether they are the fanatics of a particular nation, fanatics of a particular race, fanatics of a particular religion, but let's say just, fanatics are bad news, and there's just no doubt about it. But rather what we are referring here to is really a spiritual unity which was certainly considered by those who belong to it as being very important. Now, the big revelation to me regarding this versicle was many years after I first seen it, and it was right here in this country, and in fact on one of the paths of the Hollywood Hills. Now, I'm sure this is of tremendous interest to you, and if you fall asleep, I won't blame you. But what it was, to put it very succinctly, that in the wake of the 1956 uprising against the Russians on the part of the Hungarians, quite a few Hungarians came out to America. I had already left my home country by then, and so I met a particular family, Mr. Balog and his wife and daughter, very nice people. He was a noted pharmacist, owned a beautiful pharmacy once in Budapest. But of course, in that system you don't own anything, the system owns you. In any event, he was a well-informed gentleman. So we were walking along in the Hollywood Hills, talking about this, talking about that, and I brought up this verse and how many times I have seen it in my childhood. And he was a long-time member of the Theosophical Society. He knew Annie Besant, he knew everybody, Krishnamurti, so forth. And so he said, do you know where that verse came from? No, I don't. I just saw it on every wall, where he says, it was composed as a meditation at the Theosophical Lodge in Budapest. I always saw there was always an author's name there, Mrs. Elmer Papari. And I said, who the heck is Mrs. Elmer Papari? Now I knew she was a Theosophist and a member of that lodge. So now I could say, oh yeah, she speaks of the eternal divine justice. And I could see superimposed on it the word karma and various other theosophical notions. But let us say, when there is this kind of widespread conviction on the part of a people concerning such matters as the existence of the superior power, as the importance of the homeland, of what in German we call Vaterland, and which is, of course, also present in Hungary, and also in the attachment to the principle of a transcendentally based not only truth but justice. Where these are present, I would say it may be, time is something else. Time is a terrible thing here on earth. But aside from that, it may take time, but these principles will come and manifest if enough people are attached to them. It would be very useful if they were maybe a little more widely contemplated in our culture. Now then, this being the case, it is needful, therefore, to remember that the traditional understanding of life, of what in German we call the Weltanschauung, or the world view, particularly if it is conforming to deeper transcendental truths, and if it has at least connection with the seers and the wise people of old, who were able to penetrate into the deeper realities and to bring forth from there certain principles. Because let's say you know and I know that the sacred scriptures, the Bible, are filled with symbolic representations of reality, of riddles of various kinds, which must be deciphered, which must be understood. And so when we hear such things as Moses had to climb up on Mount Sinai in order to meet God, and I understand that Mount Sinai is, at least at the present time, an extremely inhospitable place. It's really an ugly old mountain, as I'm told by those who have been there. But so that meaning that one has to undergo a work, what the alchemists called an opus. One has to do something with oneself in order to have the great confrontations with reality, and that is definitely, let's say, indicated at that time. Now, therefore, what we have really done so far is just sort of the outer shell, the really mostly the exoteric traditions of the world, which, however, we need to keep in mind that if they are not there, and not to some appreciable degree appreciated and practiced, the entire group consciousness, whether it's a tribe, whether it's a nation, whether it's a culture, will suffer thereby. And therefore, the recognition and the, well, how else could I put it, the psychological obeisance to a superior power, and then flowing from that the awareness of, not only the awareness of a higher power, but of a sense of order and a sense of justice, which ought to be manifest in life. If these are not there, then the humanity that is pertinent to this situation is in a very sorry situation. These are like the pillars at the Temple of Solomon who hold up the structure. Boaz and Jachin, as some of you may recall in Hebrew. And if some of these supporting pillars are not there, the totality and the individuality, the mass of people and the individual people suffer, and things become worse and worse. So there is another little warning for us. The populace is needed that acknowledges the existence of a superior power and that observes standards of behavior which are based on the cosmoconception, on the understanding of life that is based on a superior power. Now, so what then is important in order to be functioning within within the worldview, the cosmoconception of that emanates ultimately from transcendence, are the following. These are the following requirements. I am still beating at the door from outside, but we shall come to others in very soon. Namely, first, there must be an openness to the presence and the effectiveness of a superior power. In other words, when such an openness is absent, we don't have the most fundamental foundation for further good developments. Oh yes, we had atheistic cultures, not even very long ago. You know what their gift to humanity was? Dachau, the Gulag Archipelago, the millions murdered in China, the killing fields of Cambodia. These were the gifts of atheistic cultures to humanity. And if we like more of it, then just go right ahead. Go right ahead. But I tell you, as the German saying has it, und so weiter, doch das Ende ist nicht heiter. And so on and so forth, but the end is anything but happy. So these are foundational. When I came to the United States, which was longer ago than I care to confess, although I keep confessing it all the time, you know, there were 1952, 1953, if you went into any classroom of whatever status, from elementary through highers, there was always the students always said a prayer before the day. And then all of a sudden we said, no, we don't want prayers. It didn't really come from the students. It came from nefarious individuals elsewhere. And I remember the late Bishop Pike. Do you remember James Pike, who became the Episcopal Bishop of San Francisco, in the beautiful cathedral that they have there? Bishop Pike originally, I remember hearing him on the radio. He opposed the doing away with the prayer in schools. And then he was won over, so to say, by the other party, then he changed his mind. And the last time I saw him, and I managed to get a little conversation in with him, was the year that he died under very, very strange and unfortunate circumstances. He and his wife went on a trip to the place where they are killing each other now again, the Holy Land, but he was not killed in that fashion. But he committed the great mistake of driving out into the desert in a bad Arab taxi cab. And the taxi cab broke down in the middle of the desert, and Bishop Pike wandered away from the car. His wife was wise enough to stay in the car, but he wandered away from the car and died in the desert. Very, 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 very bright man. And so the last time I saw him, and I thought, well, I didn't know it, of course it would be the last time. I asked him, well, Bishop, do you still believe that should not be any prayers in schools? And he said, you know what, my friend, I changed my mind. He said it was much better to have a prayer in school. And again now, so of course the atheists can come along. You know, the agnostic agnostic is somebody who doesn't know. If you come, it always said agnosis is a confession of ignorance. But in any event, so the agnostic would say, well, it's a mere formality. Well, a lot of things are a mere formality and are still useful. So that needs to be kept in mind. In any event, that was sort of the first big step where they took the presence, the reality of the transcendence of the transcendental being out of public life. And then things get worse and worse. In addition to that, I think included under the heading of order and a helpful condition in society, we have also the presence, whenever possible, of what? Of three people, at least initially, in everyone's life. Father, mother, and then yourself. That's why it was with me, because I was an only child. But let's say the presence of a nuclear family early in life has a psychological effect of major magnitude. Again, it doesn't mean it's going to take you to heaven. It doesn't mean anything of that sort, but it means that it contributes heavily to the orderliness of the psyche. Now, you may say, well, what about all the people who divorce and this and that and the other thing? Well, you know, every orderly system has built into it the possibility of disorder. The two come together. It's sort of alchemical tool. And yet, we should not build our lives on the principle of disorder, but we should build it on order. If then some disorder arises, well, okay, then we'll have to deal with that. But on the whole, I think once again, I think the regard for and the presence of the nuclear family is definitely of great importance. And secondly, I would say the openness to the presence, and once again it mentioned it more, and the effectiveness of a superior power. You know, even to the point of, look at the common sayings, popular adages, meaningless as they are for the most part, as linked to the people, in most traditional societies. Oh my God! Or if you go to the Latin country, then the name of the Virgin Mary will be used. Or Jesus Christus. things like that. What is, for instance, there's a common saying that they don't mean anything. They don't mean anything. They do mean something. Maybe the person who utters them in an exclamatory fashion doesn't mean what they are supposed to mean. But on the other hand, have you heard about mantras? Have you heard about japa? Have you been present when the Dalai Lama and others are reciting Om Mani Padme Hum? You see. So, words are power. And behind the words there are realities. And you may not be tuned into that reality every time you utter one of these words, but they are still there. Now, let me digress again a little bit into another personal reminiscence. In my home country, out in the countryside in the county Nógrád, it's in northern Hungary, not very far from what at that time was Czechoslovakia and now is Slovakia. This is what you would have seen on a summer day. And I was out there quite often. Sort of 20 minutes, half an hour before 12 noon, long row of people, mostly women accompanied by their children and carrying a strange sort of containers of dishes on a rack, marched out into the fields where the men were working. And so when they arrived, they had some blankets and sheets even with them. They spread them out on the field. They sat down on the field. By the time they did that, the bells in the church began to ring. Everybody was down on his knees saying the Angelus, the angelic salutation to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then they got up, had their meal, and then the family went home and the men continued working. I'm sure that that noble custom had been greatly suppressed by the communist regime. But once again, all right, so what? It's a meaningless gesture. Is it? Is it? No. You know, people don't do things like that without meaning. The meaning wells up within them, and therefore it should be expressed. When it isn't, something is missing. And related various circumstances. The people out in the countryside, the agriculturists, from young and old, from little kids to old people, always when they met each other, or for that matter even met me or my family, were always saying the Hungarian words of "Praised be Jesus Christ," as we did in school in Latin, Laudetur Jesus Christus. Mm-hmm. All right, again, so what? So what? Well, yes, so what? The thing is, what comes out of the mouth is important. Because even when it is done routinely, even if it is done without any particular deeper meaning, it attached to it at that moment, it brings with it something of its essential meaning. I think that these things are important. These things were important, and these things could be important. Why? Because reality, especially reality of transcendence, the reality of the greater world to which I will come now before concluding, that reality lives in the mind, in the soul, and it is It gives expression to itself in speech and deed. When these things, maybe sometimes one is missing. I mean, I must confess that when I was in school, sometimes I said, oh dear, I wish I could bolt out of the classroom and do something, beat up my classmates or something like that, which I really very seldom did. I was a real peaceful kid, But let's say, and that may be true. I mean, we all fall into triviality from meaning. But you know what? That does not take meaning away. And ultimately, all these meanings, what do they add up to? That your life has meaning. Because these things are components of your life. And the more transcendental connections there are, the more connection they have with your life, the more they will enliven you, and the more they will also create a society that is capable of nourishing your sense of meaning. Now, I'll also throw in something which now again is becoming more controversial perhaps than before, and that is patriotism. I consider myself, and have considered myself now for many, many decades, a double patriot. You probably never heard of one, but then you do encounter strange customs here, And why am I a double? I am a patriot of the United States that has taken me and my mother in, that has nourished me all this time, that has given me classes to teach, that has given me good friends, and I do. I have great thanks and great reverence and great patriotic feelings for that. And when I see the flag of the United States being carried by, I have never served in the armed services, so I don't salute this way, I salute this way. That's number one. But I still also have, and will until my dying moment, have the patriotism of my much suffered, much tormented, much bled country, which with God's grace had come back to life. And I am a Hungarian patriot as well. And you might say that's great, so what else is new? But the fact of the matter is that, once again, there has to be a feeling-toned connection with where you are, where you live, maybe where you were born. You have to have a connection with that. We don't live in a vacuum. And if you were born in another country like I was, well, then you have now two fatherlands or motherlands, depending on the language. It's used that way. So, what does all this have to do with? For one thing, I would say these allegiances cultivate. What do they cultivate within us? They cultivate reverence. We learn early in life that there are some situations, some allegiances, some people even, that are deserving and worthy of reverence. And when that is no longer there, where does reverence begin? Where does love begin? Where does kindness begin? At home! Where do you expect it to begin? In the army camp, in the Marine Corps, well, if you have cultivated some already, then maybe you can cultivate it further. But these things have to be part of a culture. And I says, why am I saying these things? Well, let me try to tell you why I'm saying them. Because I consider them to be preconditions to the meaningful relationship and meaningful relationship with the transcendental world. If we have not learned reverence, if we have not learned kindness and what is due to people who are maybe our elders, who are superior to us, if we haven't learned these in our private lives, do you think that we are going to be able to experience them elsewhere? We have to learn them, and we have to learn them early, and we have to regard them as something important. And if we don't, we are missing something. We are missing something great. And I mean these words, I hope to God that we are not on the way of missing a meaningful relationship with transcendence, because we have not learned how to have a relationship with ideals and with the following of ideals and ideal situations. Oh yeah, no, I don't want any of that. I want to be a Saint Teresa of Avila. Yeah, I want to be a Saint Francis. Yeah. How do you think those people became what they were? Because they learned and they practiced good things early in life, and then it became part of their nature, and it became part of the stairway to greater things. You know, we don't seem to realize that there are steps to spiritual greatness. There are steps to deeper spiritual insight. We will undergo strange things. Well, I haven't. I never learned. I hated physical education, and I never went to the physical education class and so forth. But let us say and consequently here I am, a nonagerian. You know what? I'm in better health than all of these people with their health foods and their vegetarianism and their postures and everything else. Why? Well, it's God's grace, I know that I didn't do it. But still, keep that in mind. You don't have to know that stuff in order to live. You have to live in order to live. Okay? And the meaning of that, to figure the meaning of that, I leave up to you. But I'm already past time, I think. But let me say now, all right. This has to do with the foundational elements where we live in our society, in our families, in our houses, wherever. And then what? Now, once the foundations inwardly have been built, then the possibility arises that we will penetrate into something deeper, something meaningful on a greater level. Sometimes, at least a portion of that will come to us earlier already in life. I don't want to brag, because this is nothing to brag about, but I would say that I encountered the symbols of the meaning of life when I was 4 years old and thereafter. Why? Because we have that capacity within us. We are We are spiritual beings, we are spirits. And if we cultivate that spiritual nature, that internal nature, maybe even supported by the inner tradition, then we are that much better off. So these things are really quite important. These things are not only quite important, but they're all important. So now let us say one way or the other, because there are all sorts of ways. I think the Lord Christ has said, in my Father's house are many mansions. And we might add to that, maybe a little bit sacrilegious, try to add to the words of the New Testament, that we have the capacity. We have the capacity to walk the stairway to heaven. We have the ability to wind our way through the tortuous road. But probably our chances of doing that are bigger if we have experienced some of the orientation toward meaning and for transcendence earlier. So let us say, let's take the most common, but at the same time also the most sad of the possibilities. Time comes earlier or later, and we die. Omnes morimur, as the Latin has it, yes. And now then what? Now we gain entrance. Depending on how fast, all kinds of, because we are dealing now with very subtle psycho-spiritual forces, and you cannot predict in advance how they are going to work. So the oversimplifications of exoteric religiosity are bound to mislead us. Oh yeah, she's with grandma in heaven. Well, how do you know that grandma deserves to be in heaven? She was a mean old thing to begin with, perhaps. But, and all these things. But the issue is that now we enter, no, we don't enter, we re-enter a reality and a world, which is, we are not going to be strangers in a strange land. Rather, we are going to be those exiles returning from the far country. So how can I say that? Well, I can say it on the basis of a number of items which I don't want to all recount, but I can say that on the basis of the fact of, let's say, of psychical research. There is enough material, volumes and volumes and volumes of heavily documented books and various other items of evidence that indicate that there is something important, something really quite promising. Promising, the definition of promising is promising to do better. So, for us in store. And the more we prepared ourselves by way of some of these stabilizing influences that I mentioned, the sooner it will appear to us when we have put the body aside, and the more important experiences will come our way. And so what now, I have to add to that, in addition to these general statements, maybe a little bit of material that is personal, that I can, to the best that one me about matters like that I can testify to in terms of personal experience. On the other side of physicality, there is an immense, a virtually endless reality of non-physical nature. It is filled with beings. Oh, they have been called angels in the monotheistic religions. They have been called the gods and goddesses in ancient antiquity in places like Egypt and Greece and Rome. They are called the gods in places like India, but they are there. They are there. And they are aware of us. They have been aware of us. Some of them have been, unbeknownst to us or with little knowledge of us, been helping to us at various times. Can you think back at whatever your earlier life beyond this moment may have been, to times when something happened to you that not only you didn't expect, but that you couldn't conjure up, that you couldn't make happen, and yet it happened, and it was of immense benefit to you? I can. And if we think about it seriously and feel about it seriously, then all of us can. We could all find ourselves in way lot worse conditions at this moment than we are if it hadn't been for strange, even miraculous assistance that has come our way. And what does that mean? It means that there is a reality other than the one that we have been introduced to in the physical world, another reality that only is minimally connected with the extroverted world, but which is nevertheless of very great importance. Now, that's one, let us say. But as the way I can, and by analog I can indicate to you, and again, if you think that I'm just what on Fairfax Avenue we would call meshuggah, which just means crazy, well, that's all right. But I have to say it. I have to say it the way I see it, and let us say the transcendental world, the world that transcends the world of the senses of the human personality, is, I heard the New Testament often uses this as it is, the kingdom of heaven is like so-and-so. But I would say it is like a vast, seemingly endless structure. And on each level, in each pigeonhole of that vast and tremendous structure, there are beings. There are forms of consciousness. You can call them angels, you can call them gods and goddesses, you may not call them anything, but it is there. And these, in turn, have a relationship to us. You might say that as we enter their habitat, we get a message from them. Hey, hello, how are you? I know you. I know you when you went through here in order to come down to that miserable place that you call Earth, you know. You know, I was here, I said goodbye to you then, and I say hello to you now. You know, again, of course, I'm exaggerating. But let's see, it's not, we are no longer stranger in a strange land. You know, when we are the stranger in a strange land, right now and right here. This is the strange land. This is the land of exile. This is the alien land to which we came, but from which, at one time or the other, we shall return. And these things are recognized by us. We can relate to them. When? We can relate to them when we have practiced some of that relating to the other, even the holy other, the intangible, the invisible, the incorporeal, the mystery. When we learned how to relate to the mystery while we were here on earth in the flesh, then we can relate to it where we are going. But no, we didn't do that. We sat in front of the computer screen all day, we sat in front of the television screen all day, and whatever balderdash we were sitting or standing in front of all day. So we are now this is the exercise ground. Those of you who like that sort of thing, this is the gymnasium where you exercise for other things. By the way, I never attended a gym class. I probably mentioned that before. Not once. As soon as we went we had a beautiful, somewhat bomb damaged, but beautiful gymnasium, and went in there. I had about other 4 or 5 boys who were my friends. We went off in the corner and we were discussing history. We were discussing philosophy, we were discussing things like that. And the gym teacher, the poor fellow, the gym teacher was not a monk like my other teacher, so we had no respect for him, He's not wearing the right clothes, or anything else. He would come up and say, "Oh, come on, boys, wouldn't you just come and throw a few balls into the basket?" And we stood there and we said, "No." And we continued with our important discussion, which we knew was more important than his. Of course, we didn't get paid for it, like he did. But let us say it needs to be remembered that this place where we are now is the exercise ground, not in a gymnasium, but it's the exercise ground. It's the place where we begin to try out our fledgling wings. But the fledgling wings are so that they may grow into mighty wings, because our winged nature is here in order to become our angelic nature. The Lord says in the Bruce Codex, "Know ye not that ye are all angels, all archangels, all the great invisibles?" And the implication being, why don't you try living up to your real nature? No, you think of yourself as something else. You think of yourself as an automobile mechanic. That's not who you are. That's what you do. And this is maybe also an important issue to remember. We have to be somebody. We have to become conscious of being somebody. And then perhaps our real nature will manifest to a greater degree. Now, just a couple of words beyond that. So here are like stories in a tower, one after the other. Madame Blavatsky said that we have 7 natures, 7 bodies, the 7 rupas, the 7 shapes. And you can make it more or you can make it less. But let us say we are a multifaceted being. And as a multifaceted being, we have the possibility of experience, the possibility of transcendence, the possibility of experiencing unbelievably unusual, marvelous things. Why? Because We have it within us. We are who we are. And because of who we are entitled to the ineffable greatness toward which we go. We have it as our birthright. It wasn't because we followed this commandment or that commandment. Those things were in order to get along in the world. But now we have to have something to get along in the order, in the ineffable greatness. And one by one, we move and we ascend toward the top. And at the top, at the ultimate, at the end of all, what do we have there? We have an ineffable light. We have an endless light. We have a light that enlightens, or the light that transfigures, a light that changes, a light that is life of its own kind. That is why in the secret doctrine and others, Blavatsky refers to the essence that is in us. That essence that has come down into materiality and that has the ability to return into it, eternity. And she refers to it as having seven rupas, 7 forms, 7 divisions. Yeah, it has that many and perhaps more. And the important thing is that we prepare ourselves. The time will come, sooner or later, it doesn't matter. The time will come when we go home, when the exile will end, when the foolishness in which we are immersed, the foolishness that we acquire from the culture, the foolishness that we acquire in the school, and the stupidity that we acquire in college, you see I'm trying to show sort of the gradations, comes to an end. And we are somewhere that is true, somewhere that is good, somewhere that is kind, and somewhere that is, how should I put it? It is home, because in it we commune with our own essence. This is, of course, the very, very important conclusion to be drawn from the total of the esoteric tradition, namely that we are an essence. We are a spark that has come from the transcendental flame. We are a feather from the wings of angels. And as such we have come into the strange land, and as such we shall return to the strange land, because the ability to return, the ability to become our authentic selfhood again, the ability to be the eternal, the timeless, the ever salvational being that we were meant to be. And we have these as our birthright. We need to recognize them and cultivate them. If we do, then we have fulfilled what we needed to do. So in many, the more you find the traces, and on that keynote I need to conclude, the more and more we find the traces of the esoteric tradition in the different religions, the different traditions. They tell us, there's something inside of you. You can call it spirit. That's the pneuma of the Greek the breath of the eternal. You can call it by various names, but there's something in you, something there that wants to come into its own, something that wants to go home, something that wants to come out of the exile, and that with the help that it can avail itself of, it will. And it has very little to do with all the, let me now use the magic word that I mentioned before, it has very little to do with the balderdash wherein we exist. So, if we continue to strive for the real, oh yes, the Hindus got it right, from the unreal lead me to the real. Because we are in the unreality now. But there is something that needs to be added. Even though we are in the unreal, somewhere deeply hidden, deeply buried within us, covered up by all kinds of things, is something real. And this real will go to the greater reality, because that is its nature. And by so doing, it will have fulfilled its own destiny. This is what has been called salvation. This is what has been called enlightenment. Whatever it has been called, it is the ultimate objective. And that ultimate objective awaits us. You don't have to do anything terribly great. Oh, yes. Something that is much, much greater than we can even approximate speaking about. It you can and you must and you should become yourself. Because that is your true self. Here you have been I have been here for more decades than I can count, almost. And all kinds of wild and weird and unnecessary and stupid stuff has been represented to me. This is the real. But thank God, there was something inside of me that said, nah, come on, you must be kidding. that isn't the real. I may not know exactly what the real is, but I can sense it, I can feel it, I can love it, and with God's grace and with my work and yours and the support of each other, we shall do it, we shall get there, and we shall be free, and we shall be what we were meant to be. Why? Because we were meant to be. These are, what we are doing now are inconsequential things. They are side issues, but the real issue is there. The real road is there. The real task is before us, and we have within us the capacity to fulfill that task, and we shall do so. And thank you very much.